Welcome to Choose the Nickel. I'm your host, George Bailey. My co-founder and technical support is the gorgeous Christina Bailey. This podcast is about giving kids financial freedom. We're interviewing fascinating people for their insights about how children learn to be financially savvy. Our guests come from diverse, sometimes conflicting schools of thought, and we love the opportunity to learn from them. We encourage all to weigh our guests' ideas on how to help children thrive, both financially and in general. We invite you to visit our website at www.choosethenickel.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and try out the things we are learning on the podcast. This episode marks the end of another quarter of Choose the Nickel, which means we're interviewing a member of the family, this time my mom, Elinor Bailey. As a youth, Elinor attended summer programs at both Parsons School of Design and the Art Students League. She spent her freshman year of college at Tyler School of Fine Arts and finished her undergraduate degree at Brigham Young University. She's now a leading authority in artisan cloth doll making and continues to develop new ideas as she travels the country to teach others how to make beautiful art. Ladies and gentlemen, Elinor Bailey. Mom Bailey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is what I have to do to get a call, huh?
Yeah, you know that's not true.
I know it isn't true. You are a dedicated son, and I love you for it, but I thought I'd tease you a little.
Oh, I don't mind that. We all have our jokes. I wanted to ask as my first question who your favorite child is.
Oh, absolutely. It's George Bailey. Do you know him?
That's good. Take that, Isaac. All right. In any case, I am really happy to have you on the show. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. You and I have talked about a few things that maybe we could discuss, go into more depth with. The first of which is that, and the thing that really got me thinking that I would like to have you on the show is that I remember from my own childhood that I would walk through the kitchen past the studio and you were there just working on these dolls and these art projects and whatnot. And it always said something really important to me about the value of work and passion. And I'd like for you to tell me a little bit more about how you developed that passion that you have for artisan doll making, for art, and all of the wonderful things that you do.
Well, I have to tell you, one of the most important things for me as an artist was that I was encouraged in what I did as a child. And I can remember doing some terrible things to the carpet as like India ink.
Yeah.
And not being punished. I've made art since I could smear it on walls. It was just, I've always loved it.
It wasn't just me or the cat. You were part of that problem.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so I didn't realize this, and this is probably in your home in New York, or where was this happening?
A lot of my development as a person who thought of themselves as an artist happened after I was 10 years old. We lived near New York City. Vincent van Gogh had an exhibit there. And I was 14 years old, and my aunt took me to this Van Gogh exhibit. And it was there that I felt this enormous pull, this sense of wanting to be. His work was so compelling to me. And at the same time, there was the movie Lust for Life, which is an amazing film, and it was about him. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty well hooked on that idea. But the encouragement from my family in the sense that they saw that it was possible to be an artist, they didn't discourage me from it, although they did advise that I learn how to teach so I could have some sort of a profession.
Well, and I think that what teaching does for your art is it also helps you to be able to relate better to those who are really big fans of your art. I think that that's a great way to express it. Which aunt was this?
Well, it turned out to be. Turned out to be.
Which aunt was this, by the way?
Aunt Isabel. She was my father's sister. You never met her because she was dead by that time, but she had a studio in New York City, and she was an artist herself. And she encouraged me as she was able. She also scared the heck out of me, but other than that,
why?
It was amazing.
Why was she so scary?
She was just a very intimidating person. She was the kind of person who looks at you very critically, and that was a difficult thing for a child. So,
got it. What do you think that did for you, and what were some of the negative consequences of that?
The negative consequence was that I never fully utilized what I had, which was this wonderful and incredibly gifted woman, was not someone that I felt I could use as a mentor. On the other hand, I did show her my work, and she did approve of it. I've got a painting in my house now that belonged to my mother that Isabel really quite liked, and I was thrilled with that. On the one hand, you feel a little hesitant to talk to her. On the other hand, if you do get a chance to get some praise, you feel euphoric.
Oh, yeah.
So it was wonderful.
Well, because it's real, and you have no doubt that it's real because, that person.
Yeah, because you've seen the other side.
They've never pulled any punches before, so now it's legit.
Yeah.
That is a really neat insight. And I think that that's so neat about kids. I worry about that with my own. I don't want to ever be so judgmental on the one hand that I drive them away from wanting to confide in me their ambitions and whatnot. But on the other hand, I also do want them to know that when I praise their work, I really mean it. I really am proud of what they're doing and who they're becoming.
Yes, I think that's important. But I found praise to be a wonderful medicine. I've used it with you kids. I've tried very hard to find things about you that I love and honor and to constantly let you know that you are valuable to me in that way.
Thank you. That I always have appreciated. Tell me a little bit more about New York and what it was like to grow up in New York, particularly the art scene and how influential that was. You said a little bit about Vincent van Gogh, going to the theater. Were there other facets of that experience that really helped you develop your passion?
Well, there certainly was, because it was available. New York City is the hub of culture in the United States, maybe in the world. It's certainly a hub in the world. Has fabulous museums. And there was a great train system. And so by the time I was, about 14, 15 years old, I was going into the city on a regular basis. The first year that I actually went to school in New York was when I went to Parsons School of Design, and I was only 16. I was the youngest student there. It was an amazing experience. I went there for a summer and learned all kinds of things. It was my first life drawing, which is naked people, in case you didn't know that. And I just loved the human form. I fell in love with the human form then. It was amazing. It was a wonderful experience. But being able to go to a museum on a regular basis, sometimes daily, really, really influenced me.
It's interesting that you should talk so passionately about the museums, because I've been thinking a little bit about what that means for my own kids. To have that type of exposure, how important is it that we get them out to places where they can look at and see and learn about these things? St. Louis has been spectacular for our kids, but at the same time, I would never debate that New York City is a world hub, if not the world hub for those types of things. It makes me wonder, how do we as adults help cultivate and maintain that type of an atmosphere so that as many kids as possible can experience that?
Well, I think that's an issue. It really is a problem. But one of the marvelous things about today is that we have so many visual things that we can bring into our home. I'm a book person. I like to be able to pick up a book and haul it someplace where I can look at it and just enjoy it. And I have many books about art. The written part doesn't really interest me terribly, but I look a lot at artistic things. And I think when parents want their children to make art, first of all, they should make art themselves, which I know your Christina does. She makes quilts and she makes other things, and she makes wonderful food. I think your family is very self-expressive and very unique. That's, to me, really important. If you can't bring your children into the world, if it's not practical, if it can't happen, then bring the world into your children. Serve it up to them in as many doses as you can, through films, through books, through chatter, and through meeting artists locally. I mean, actually meeting people who make art.
What do you mean about chatter?
Chatter is, to me, just having it be sprinkled like salt and pepper over the entirety of your life, and not just reserve it for very special times.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think of the dinner table and how important that is. There was a time in my childhood when I think we were really good at that at one point, and then not so good later on. I mean, I remember eating Oh, what was that pizza? It was just so weird. Dad and I, we ate it all
was it pizza that
the time.
I made? Because
We would go out and buy. When I was
Blah.
about 16, 17, at that point, it was just like,
Yeah.
We give up. But there were really some good memories around the dinner table. I remember even like kind of where we all sat around that table, whatnot. But that chatter, the way I interpreted it at least, was very important for me to be able to hear that type of discussion, even though I never got the first word in or the last word in.
Well, you were the youngest.
Oh, gosh.
And that's the problem for a young person.
Yeah.
However, you have made up for it.
Oh. Grew up with some very outsized siblings. Love them all.
Very.
Love them all.
That helps in a way, because I think that the way that your brothers and sisters absorbed that information, because I surrounded them with my own art.
Yes.
And I surrounded them with conversation. Their father was a musician, so there was a lot of talk about music. There was the band. There was that constant involvement. Music is very, very fundamental in our family. We sang together. It was some of the glue that held us together when everything else sort of was falling apart.
Yeah.
So I believe that the arts are a wonderful gift to any family. And I don't think you have to make good art. I think the idea is just to make it. If it's bad art, it's better than no art at all.
Yeah.
I would rather see kids singing off key than not singing.
That is so true. I really agree with that entirely. Yesterday, I even watched my own kids sing, and it was just wonderful. A really great experience. Now, I want to take what you're saying about art and project it onto life in general. You have to be striving on some level to be able to expose your kids to all sorts of things so that they can see the joy of life and they can find that one thing that makes them really happy. Because for one kid, it may be art, and for another, it may be sports, and for another, it may be computers. But I think that conversation, that exposure, really important. And my exposure to the arts as a child was wonderful. I can't thank you enough for that. My next question I want to ask you about is, you mentioned grandfather and his work for an advertising agency. And actually, I had no idea. I was like, what? I always thought that he had his own little business that he was doing. I know very little about grandfather and the work that he was doing. Could you tell me a little bit about your observations of him as a professional?
Well, he was an amazing man. And by the time we were in New York, he had become a vice president of J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, which is the largest advertising agency in the world. And he had several accounts that were very interesting, and I was fascinated by them. But I was also absolutely in love with my father. So I would follow him around and ask him questions about his business. And I had the rare and wonderful opportunity of going into the city and meeting him there at his office, which was just right off of Grand Central Station on Lexington Avenue. So I could get there easily. One of the interesting things about that business was that the entire office was furnished with antiques, the most gorgeous antique furniture you ever saw. And it wasn't cubicles. They were these lovely offices. They were commodious. It was beautiful. And I was so proud to sit across the desk from my dad and know how important he was there. And I was so proud of the work he did. And we got a chance to meet some celebrities through him and through his work. But I always knew that for him, work was enormously important. And he was always working. If he wasn't working on his business, which he did a lot, he was a working gardener. He was a passionate gardener. And if he wasn't doing that, then he was doing something else. He was never not doing. He read voraciously. So I had an example of my father as a highly cultured man. And my mother loved music. So all of those things were very important to us. I got a sense of the importance of business through him. However, here's an interesting story, George. When I started working myself, I decided that I needed to go to the quilt market, which is the wholesale market for quilt shops. When I told him what my goals were and asked him to help me, he was very reticent and he was very dismissive of what could be accomplished at a market, because his experience was with men And this was a woman's market.
Yeah.
Most of the people who were articulate and drawing crowds and so on were women in this business. And the way you managed yourself in a female-oriented business was vastly different than from a male. So when I told him what I wanted to do, he said he dismissed it. But I accomplished all that I wanted to do in my first trip to Quilt Market. So I knew then that my dad just didn't know about female marketing. And that was very, very interesting to me.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of a new perspective on that. And at this point,
totally new.
He was still alive, and would
yes,
be
he
for
was very
many
much
years to come.
alive.
And would be for many years to come. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That is amazing. One of the things that jumped out to me is that you said that you really loved being around grandfather.
Oh,
and what
yes.
was it about him, though? I loved being around grandfather as well, and I miss him. I saw him as being just a very intelligent man, but I think I don't have the same experience, even close to the same level as you do. Tell me a little bit about him as a human being and what it was that you loved so much about him.
Well, in the first place, he was a very attractive person. He was handsome, and he was commanding, and he was articulate. I knew all of these things about him. I had to measure up. That was one of the problematic things about having a father like this, is that he was, just like his sister, a little bit intimidating. And so I would do anything to please him. Fortunately, I was the first child, and he did pay attention to me. I remember he read to me Swiss Family Robinson, and I just enjoyed it enormously. My mother read to both my brother and sister and myself a lot, but to have Dad read, now that was a different thing altogether. The thing that was amazing about him was that he was respected by everybody. He was a respectable person, but he held himself apart and aloof in some respects. So it wasn't easy. It was never going to be easy. You felt you needed to impress him.
Yeah. On that level, I can definitely relate, because I do remember being intimidated a little bit by him. And my world growing up, I was not around business people, businessmen. So it was very hard for me to kind of relate to him, because I grew up, I liked playing with Legos and playing Nintendo. That was my thing. And that was not grandfather.
Well, grandfather was completely without any connection to this new world.
Yeah.
I am pretty dense, but he was just as. In fact, you could make a person like yourself, George, even as a child, could intimidate any adult with your information about how to order things. I remember you're ordering your baseball card. And all of these things that you could do with such alacrity, he couldn't. He couldn't do those things. Mary Jo, his second wife, in fact, she was a wonderful business person. And I think had it not been for her, they wouldn't have had much success with the hardware business, because I think she was the more practical of the two of them. He was kind of a dreamer.
Interesting. I don't know if I would have looked at it that way, though I could imagine Mary Jo as being a little bit more astute. Now, for all the maybe distance that I felt with grandfather, though I loved him and am grateful to him, I felt enormous closeness to grandmother. And I want to dig into that a little bit with you and find out, what about your mom? What were the ways in which she influenced you, got you into art and things like that? I love grandmother. We wrote to each other all the time. I think of her very often. Tell me about that.
My mother was a wonderful mother for an adult. For a child, she was more like a child. She didn't have the strength of witness that my father did. She didn't influence me. But the thing that she did do was she never stopped me from being myself. She was always encouraging. I can't remember her being particularly critical at all. She was really pretty gentle.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wished she would be stronger. I wanted myself to be stronger so that she would be stronger. Holding my parents' marriage together was an effort that I made when I was about 16, and I knew that they were falling apart. There was nothing I could do, obviously. It had nothing to do with me, per se, although it had everything to do with me in terms of its results. My mother, though, was always so enthusiastic, and she loved you kids. She was so loving, and she was so playful and so sweet. I think that her influence in the family, actually, when you think about it, has been much more profound than the influence of my father, which is funny.
In what way?
Well, because she was so emotionally available. I think in the end, kids respond to somebody who really loves them. And they understand love when it's pretty obvious that they're loved. The subtlety goes right over their heads. Can't be subtle with children and love.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And that is a very interesting legacy for her to leave behind. I always felt her support. I don't remember at any point feeling like awkward to talk with grandmother about my own hopes and dreams and whatnot. But with grandfather, I knew it had to be practical. He was helping me with my undergraduate degree, something for which I'm very, very grateful. He was the one that encouraged me, actually. When I was at BYU, he encouraged me to go out, get a job, and work through my undergraduate degree, which I did. And I worked my tail off. Oh my gosh. It was a real eye-opener. And so I see those two different sides. Grandfather is having provided me with a sense that I needed to make my way in the world. I needed to work hard. Grandmother, and just the absolute love that she had for me and all of her grandkids. But I really felt it for me. And
well, it was more pronounced for you because you tapped into her greatest passion, which was to write letters. She loved letter writing. And of course, you were at the stage where kids didn't write letters.
Yeah, I still don't now. With
well,
grandmother,
you don't now,
when
but
she,
you did
when
then,
she
when
passed
you were
away,
on your
I was
mission.
like, well, that's done. You know?
And it is a shame because I'll tell you what.
I know.
That letter writing was precious because it was permanent. I mean, I have mother's letters. I have several of mother's letters.
Yeah. We need to teach our kids to communicate and in a manner that is meaningful, particularly as they build relationships in the professional sphere. I think that sometimes we are really scattered in this generation. We write a simple email. It doesn't have the same impact at all, you know?
No.
And
if you really, one of your Aunt Muff's bits of advice on getting a job was if she went and had an interview, she would write a thank you note.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and that's such a big deal. Yeah.
And that really made a difference. Now, I'm telling you that letter writing, going to the trouble of doing something that personal, because it's much more deeply personal than an email, means the world, particularly to older people. It seems to me that the world has speeded up. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like it's wound tighter and tighter so that every minute is spoken for.
It's a process of figuring out what are those things that really should stay with us and what should not. And I think that letter writing is one of those things that now, in a way, you know, it has an opportunity to become more special because it's so rare. But
well,
the thing
I
is
remember William writing me.
Yeah.
I have that letter in my journal.
This is William, my son, just to be
That's
clear to
William, your son. That touched me so deeply. It changed my perception of William. I dined out on that story for an entire year. That's how important that letter was.
Good. You got to get good mileage out of stuff like that. But I think that there's an opportunity, and I wonder if we teach our kids to be a little bit more vulnerable, as it were, to communicate a little bit better, that will help them later in the professional sphere. And I hate to reduce something this emotional and this special down to profession.
Oh, but it did.
But it is.
Because
it is
people
really
are emotional every place.
Exactly. It's not like we've stopped becoming emotional. It's just that we've stopped feeding that need.
I'm not sure it's that. I think we tend to formalize it. When we get into business, we tend to formalize it. Mm-hmm. But somebody who's spontaneous and says something spontaneous immediately when you're in an interview situation or in a situation where you're trying to make a sale, all of those things can be a personal experience which is uplifting. You can bring that with you.
Yeah.
You don't have to leave it in your home.
This is one of the things I loved so much about that book, Meaningful Work by Sean Askenazi. He's a guest we've had on the show. His whole philosophy is built around human interaction, and that is one of the things that has led him to be successful in business. That being said, I'd like to turn it over a little bit to your successes in business and things that you feel parents should know. You know, tell me a little bit about how it is that your business in doll making and teaching took off.
I have to say that one of the most important things about the kind of personal business that I was involved in, which is much like what you're doing, is that you have to be there. There's no substitute for yourself. You have to be there maybe longer than you want to be in order to get accepted, because I was always quirky. The first review that I received on one of my dolls, which was negative, I was following a couple of women along, and they said, "Did you see the new doll? Oh, I like her dress, but her face is really ugly." So I said something.
Yeah.
I said something. I said, I'm the person who made these dolls. And they said, "We don't care. The face is still ugly."
Yes.
But I found that it was a very quirky-looking doll. But if I'd gone away then and just crumpled up in a heap and died someplace, no one would have cared.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I persisted in presenting the same quirkiness throughout my product. I insisted on being myself. I found my niche, which was teaching people who actually had never made dolls before how to make a doll and enjoy the experience. I found that the form actually transformed me. It stood between me and my sarcasm and anger, and it was wonderful foil for me, that doll form, and I performed with it. I think that when a person goes into business for themselves, they have to put up with a bumpy ride because it's just the way it is. But so many young people today are inventing their own businesses and presenting these little quirky niche things. And I say, go for it.
Yeah. Do you think that there is at least a degree to which you have to move a little, be a little bit flexible? Take the criticism and say, you know what, you've got a point. Where is that point that they've got a point?
I found that there were certain things that I could do in my classroom or when I lectured that were guaranteed pleasers. First of all, if I referenced what they were doing, if I'd go speak to a quilt guild and I'd noticed during the business meeting that they had some charitable thing that they were interested in, or I would comment on that.
Yeah.
I would comment on the clothing that I saw in the audience, on things that were particular to them. That was one point at which I felt I was listening to them.
Yeah. You know, that's a difficult skill to teach kids, though. And I've been thinking a lot about this one as well, because I've been thinking, here I've got one of my children likes to talk. Well, actually, no, 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 of my children really like to talk about what they love. What you love is of no interest to them. Now, you know, they're being kids, and I get that. That's part of it being a parent and whatnot. But how do you teach kids then to build that skill, to be able to comment on what other people are doing and to see their successes and whatnot? In your raising of children, at what stage did you notice that your kids were getting good at that?
When they became parents.
But not until then. Oh, man.
Actually not. I think that when a kid becomes a parent, they begin to have a passionate interest in someone other than themselves. Now, it may be the first time they fall in love with a girl or a boy or whatever, you know, and they take an interest in somebody else. But I found that certain ones of my children were always interested in others. Laura, for instance, was always our little angel comforter. She always knew. She knew how you felt, and you would feel that response from her. So there were kids naturally responding to one another. And, you know, you just can't tell when they're going to do it. But I know this, that if they see an example in their parent, someone who is interested in what they are doing, that is the surest way to teach them how to do that for someone else.
I like that you say that, because parenting by example is always the best thing by a long shot. But I don't know if I entirely agree with you that it takes becoming a parent to become interested in other people. As you said, you know, Laura herself is a great example. So there's got to be ways that we can at least influence that. Though I also don't doubt that there are kids who are more predisposed to that, and there are kids who are more predisposed to, you know, themselves. And,
that's right.
You know,
and the more brilliant a kid is, the more they are predisposed to listen to their own voice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But it's a certain kind of brilliance. You know, I just don't know. I honestly don't know, George. I think that there are so many instances when a kid suddenly shows that intense interest in somebody else or in somebody else's life.
Yeah.
You remember when your dad brought home that old guy who had a head injury for Thanksgiving?
Yes, I do.
You know, you guys were all interested in him.
Yeah.
because your father did something that was so compassionate and so completely wacko that everybody paid attention.
So maybe we should just all be out there going for shock value.
Well, I think every once in a while, a little shock to a kid is helpful.
Yeah.
Like bringing them into a hospital where kids are dealing with cancer.
Yeah, yeah.
Like taking them to a home with old people who are hurting.
Yes.
Like letting them take care of a pet.
Mm. So now speaking
Although
of that.
I hate that idea, but you know.
You were never one for pets. Oh my gosh. You need to be over here more often.
We did have a cat.
Our chickens and our snakes and mice and stuff like that. You know, I don't know if I told.
Well, your wife is much more tolerant than I am.
She likes that more. I'm getting used to it. You know, our pet snake escaped. So just.
Oh, very nice.
Just bear that in mind next time you come and visit. She is here. We like to say that she is with us still. In any case, okay. Well, that brings me to my last question.
Yes.
That is, you know, you talked about shocking kids with some of the good stuff you do, helping out the poor. What is your favorite charitable cause?
Well, there's no question about it. I have to say that my biggest enthusiasm, I have two of them. Actually, I have three.
But there's no question. Go ahead.
There's no question. Okay, the first one, which is a constant, is I love paying tithing.
Yeah.
And I love knowing that what I give to my church does the kind of good that I would do if I were controlling it.
Yeah.
So I feel very, very good about that. The second one is Peace for Paul, because that is the organization that my granddaughter had so much to do with and is so supportive of. And it's been such an important part in our family's life because Ellie got involved with this as my older daughter, Evelyn, and her daughter. And so I love Peace for Paul. But the third thing is I'm a big tipper.
Really?
And the reason is I feel that this is my way of helping the working poor.
Tell me more about that. When did this philosophy evolve? And, you know, tell me a little bit more about that. That's intriguing.
In the first place, I traveled a good deal. So because I traveled a good deal, I would have people helping with luggage or doing things like that or serving me a meal or whatever it is. So I got a chance to meet a lot of people who were service people. And I would pay attention to their service and I would tip them. And now I tip just for checking my bags. I tip $10. Those guys take care of me.
Yeah.
I come in, they know my name, they know everything about me. So that's payback. But I like to think that somebody who's struggling to make ends meet, who's still in that struggle, is worthy to be recognized and validated.
Yeah.
So I will put a big tip on anything where somebody, personal service, I will validate that because I think it's just so important that we recognize that there are people out there who, even though they work maybe 2 and 3 jobs, are still not making ends meet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful thought. And there are things that we can all do, I think, to ease up those burdens, help out.
Yeah. Part of it is to thank them for their service.
Yeah, absolutely. Something
practical like money helps. And if I give $5 tip for a $4 meal, it's fine with me.
Well, Mom, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot about my grandparents, learned a lot more about you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you, George, for showing the interest. Makes an old lady feel quite important.
You're important to this guy. All right.
Bye-bye, honey.
Bye-bye. Everybody else, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the interview and found useful ideas about things you can do with your kids. Be sure to check the show notes at www.choosethenickel.com for links to names, books, and other resources we discussed in today's show. Also, please subscribe to our newsletter and visit our contact page where you can give us feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube, and you can follow Choose the Nickel on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We invite you to share Choose the Nickel with your friends and join us in our quest to teach kids financial freedom.